Hey guys, tonight we're flying into a different kind of bedtime story, one soaked in divine feathers, mortal longing, and the kind of royal scandal that would crash even Olympus's gossip columns. You blink, and the world around you shifts. The air smells of crushed laurel and summer storm. In the distance, a river hums softly, as if it's keeping secrets for the gods. You're not in your room anymore, you're barefoot in Bronze Age Sparta, standing by a rush-lined riverbank at Zeus. Dusk, the sky thick with purple thunderclouds and something else. Anticipation. You feel it in your chest. A tremor like wings. Not metaphorical wings, actual wings. Giant, snowy, shimmering wings beating the sky into submission. You look up and there he is, a swan. Except this swan has the arrogance of a god, the drama of a theater major, and eyes that burn with something wholly unnatural. You don't know it yet, but you're witnessing the warm-up act for one of history's most infamous seductions. This swan isn't here to preen or paddle. He's here for a queen. He's Zeus, king of the gods. And he's horny. So, before you. Get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories drift. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You could almost hear the smug chuckle in Zeus's throat as he scans the earth from his private Olympus penthouse. Bored of immortality and sick of ambrosia. Eternity, as it turns out, makes even godhood monotonous. He's already transformed into golden rain to get with Dano, showed up as a bull for Europa, and don't ask once did something scandalous involving an eagle and a young cupbearer named Ganymede. But tonight, Zeus wants something different. Something elegant, regal, mortal enough to be thrilling, but queenly enough to justify the theatrics. That's when he sees her, Leda, queen of Sparta, tall, composed, radiating the kind of composure that makes even gods stutter. Married, of course. Isn't it always the way? Now here's where it gets complicated. Because gods aren't supposed to envy mortals. But Zeus? He's a specialist in the breach of divine protocol. He doesn't approach Leda as himself too obvious. Too shiny. He wants entrance, not fireworks, so he watches. Waits. Then one late afternoon, as Leda walks along the Eurotas River, the wind shifts and a white swan falls from the sky like a feathered meteor. It flutters toward her wounded, vulnerable, trembling. Leda hesitates. She sees the fear in its eyes, the way its wings shake. It's being chased, perhaps, by an eagle, a predator, a metaphor, or maybe it's all staged. Zeus has always loved a dramatic entrance. Here's the million drachma question historians still argue over. Was Leda tricked, enchanted, or entirely complicit? You're standing right there now, watching her cradle the trembling swan against her body, its neck curling softly around her throat like a question mark. You wonder what she's thinking. Compassion? Curiosity? Something deeper, darker? The story diverges here, depending on who's telling it. Some versions whisper of force, others of consent. Still others insist the entire event was a symbolic dream, and the eggs that followed were more myth than biology. But let's not skip ahead just yet. You can almost feel the temperature drop as the swan begins to shift, not visibly, not dramatically, but with a kind of shimmer that prickles your skin. Something divine hums beneath the feathers. Time goes syrupy. You watch the air around Leda grow thick with enchantment, or maybe it's just late summer heat. Either way, what happens next is the kind of thing temples were built to whisper about, and destroyed to forget. That night, Leda will return to her palace changed, and within a few weeks she'll lay 2 eggs. Yes, eggs. The gods, it turns out, never cared much for biology. One egg will birth the twins Castor and Pollux, half mortal, half miracle, depending on who their real dad is. The other will crack open to reveal 2 girls, Clytemnestra, future murderer of kings, and Helen, the woman whose face will launch 1,000 ships, reduce a city to ashes, and ruin the lives of poets for generations. But for now, you're still by the riverbank. You still hear the slow thrum of the swan's heartbeat, its breath hot against Leda's ear. You still taste the storm in the air, feel the tension between myth and metaphor. A tiny part of you wonders how often Zeus has done this. If the swan form is just one costume in an immortal wardrobe full of weirdly seductive disguises. And here's a fringe tidbit to twist the mood. In 18th century French courts, noblemen sometimes gifted lovers tiny swan-shaped perfumes, little nods to this exact myth. A way to say, I know the story. And I too am charming and mildly dangerous. Meanwhile, the swan ruffles its feathers and begins to melt into nothing. Or into Zeus, or maybe into your dreams. This part remains a mystery, even now. And yet, art through the centuries keeps trying to pin it down. Marble statues of Leda, clutching a swan in that charged moment. Their poses forever frozen between care and collapse. Erotic, symbolic, violent, tender. Even Michelangelo couldn't quite decide. And maybe that's the point. The myth isn't here to give answers. It's here to disturb, seduce, and linger. You step back from the river now. The swan is gone. Leda walks away slowly, her gown damp and her thoughts unreadable. The sky is clearing. But something heavy has been set in motion. Not just a scandal, not just divine mischief, but a fracture in the mortal world that will echo into legends, wars, and every bad breakup ever blamed on beauty. You feel it now, don't you? That hush before the chaos. The rustle of destiny in the reeds. You walk beside Leda now, even though she can't see you. She moves like a woman with something tangled inside her ribcage, something fluttering, unfinished. The palace gates of Sparta creak open with the slow pride of a kingdom that knows its queen is revered, and possibly divine by proxy. You trail behind her, through limestone halls humming with incense and the quiet murmurs of servants who don't dare ask why the queen's gown is soaked to the hem or why her eyes look like they've just seen a god in disguise. Because maybe she has. The thing is, you're not even sure anymore if Zeus was seducing her or if she was, in her own way, seducing back. That's the thing about desire, it muddies gods and mortals alike. And speaking of muddy, let's pivot. For a second, in ancient Egyptian contraceptive lore, yes, we're going there. Women used to mix crocodile dung and honey into a vaginal paste. Romantic? Not especially. But real. Fringe facts like these give the modern brain whiplash, don't they? Back in Sparta, Leda isn't concocting odd recipes. She's wrestling with something far more volatile. Consequence. Days pass. The palace buzzes around her. Her husband, Tyndareus, might suspect something, or might be too loyal or too political to care. Kings marry queens for alliances, not love, and any children birthed of beauty and secrecy are often folded quietly into the royal record, no questions asked. But this is bigger. One morning, a servant shrieks from the linen chamber. You rush there with the others, and what you see halts time itself. Nestled in royal bedsheets are 2 eggs. Not symbolic ones, real ones. Smooth, oversized, almost humming with power. You watch Leda stare at them like they've betrayed her, like they know more than she does. The midwives don't touch them. No one speaks. Later, one cracks, then the other. The first gives you 2 boys, strong, radiant, already glancing at each other like they've shared every past life imaginable. Castor and Pollux. One mortal. One not. It'll become important later, especially when death comes knocking. The second egg breaks with a soft sigh, and there she is. Helen, not yet the destroyer of Troy, just a baby, blinking at a world that will never forgive her for being. That beautiful doc. You step back. You watch the whole court pretend this is normal. that their queen has simply, unremarkably, birthed a royal litter with no need for pesky biological explanations. No one dares utter the word Zeus, not out loud. But you can feel it in the way servants cross themselves when passing the nursery, how nobles look away when Leda enters a room. Everyone knows. Or thinks they do. That's the thing with myths, they make space for scandal while keeping just enough distance to let people pretend it's all metaphor. Historians still argue whether this was a morality tale or an erotic origin story wrapped in divine feathers. Some say the eggs prove divine birth. Others argue it's allegory for political transition. And some, frankly, just think the Greeks liked weird bird imagery. But let's zoom in on Helen for a moment, lying there in her swaddles, unaware of the destiny growing inside her like a spark waiting to be flame. You've never seen a baby so still, so perfect. You swear her gaze brushes you. Already, she looks like someone who'll be blamed for everything and forgiven for nothing. In the shadowed corners of the nursery, old women whisper prayers. They know beauty of that magnitude isn't a gift. It's a curse with a flawless smile. And poor Clytemnestra, born from the same egg, destined for a different brand of tragedy. She'll become queen herself one day and a killer. She marry Agamemnon, Helen's brother-in-law, and later she murder him in a bathtub. But not yet. Right now, she's just a tiny squirming thing who gets handed to the wrong wet nurse, while all eyes are on her sister's impossible glow. You wander the palace for days, watching time unfold around these children like it's already trying to carve them into legends. Tyndareus plays along, naming the twins his sons, announcing to the kingdom that their queen is a miracle and their gods generous. It's the kind of political PR spin that would make modern press secretaries weep with envy. But behind closed doors, Leda barely speaks. Some nights she sits in the garden and stares at the moon, whispering something you can't quite hear, maybe a name, maybe a question, maybe just the word why. Because once the gods touch you, nothing stays soft. Not your name, not your future, not even your memory of what you were before. Leda has everything: palace, power, children, but she's haunted. And maybe that's why no myth really knows what happens to her next. Some say she dies quietly. Others that she becomes a goddess herself, lifted into the stars beside her. Swan-shaped lover. Still others claim she wanders, half mad, caught forever between the memory of a touch and the mystery of whether she wanted it. You don't get closure with myths, just echoes. Now here's our nightly dose of sex through history. We step sideways briefly to the court of Louis XV. Imagine a long hallway in Versailles filled with perfume, powdered wigs, and bored courtiers. Louis, bored with his official mistresses, created a private pleasure palace behind the main chateau. It was called the Parc aux Oeufs, or Deer Park. There, young girls, sometimes barely teenagers, were brought in and pampered, groomed, and bedded under the careful administration of his valet. Sex with kings? More like emotional real estate development, with a facade of roses. The difference between divine seduction and royal possession? Sometimes not much. Back in Sparta, the city learns to adjust. Poets begin composing hymns to the miracle birth. Sculptors start chiseling marble busts of Leda with mysterious bird-like eyes. The myth is already metastasizing, turning into something with 1,000 versions. Did she love him? Did he force her? Was it fate? A metaphor? A warning? You'll hear all these in whispers over the centuries, in paintings smuggled into popes' chambers, in 17th century erotic poetry, and even in Victorian footnotes desperately trying not to sound interested. But tonight, you're here at the beginning, watching Helen and her siblings grow in the golden cages of royal life, watching Leda's face harden ever so slightly each time someone mentions the gods, watching time line up its dominoes, preparing for the chain reaction that will someday burn Troy to the ground. You stay close to Helen now. though she still doesn't know you're there. She's just a child, but already the palace treats her like a loaded weapon, handled delicately, dressed elaborately, kept polished but never truly understood. Her hair grows like threads of sunlight, her eyes sharper than any noble's blade, and every step she takes seems choreographed by a future she hasn't agreed to. Lita watches her daughter the way a sculptor eyes a statue she never meant to chisel, with awe, guilt, and the slow horror of realizing what she's created. Around them, the walls of the Spartan palace pulse with new tension. Diplomats arrive from distant lands with overly sweet gifts and offers of alliance dressed as friendship. Everyone wants to be near the girl born from the gods. Everyone wants a slice of the divine. The politics of beauty sharpen into warfare long before swords are drawn. Helen is too young to understand, but she notices the silence when she enters rooms. The way servants bow too low, how her half-brothers Castor and Pollux watch her with a protectiveness that's almost afraid. The twins, now full of energy and purpose, split their days between combat drills and wrestling with their own identities, one mortal, one not. Castor bleeds. Pollux doesn't. It's a cruel sort of brotherhood, one where they know from the start that only one of them will be truly safe from time. It's a design flaw in divine genetics, and they never stop measuring themselves against each other, even when they laugh like no one else in the world understands them better. Meanwhile, Zeus has not returned. Or if he has, it's been in the form of a whispering wind that brushes Lita's cheek during her walks, or a swan feather she once found on her windowsill that she swears wasn't there the night before. She keeps it in a box. She doesn't talk about it. The gods don't do check-ins, and Zeus especially isn't known for follow-through. He collects women like legends collect embellishments, quickly, greedily, and without asking how they feel about being remembered this way. Historians still argue whether Zeus's many seductions are meant to reflect divine right, or just ancient excuses for celestial misbehavior. Either way, the stories pile up. Danae with her reign of gold, Europa with her bull ride across the sea, Semele incinerated by divine intimacy. And now Lita forever captured mid-embrace with a swan in art galleries across Europe, painted by men centuries later who never once questioned how weird it is to eroticize a bird attack. But hey, marble's patient. And so is mythology. In the palace, Tyndareus, the human king in this story, remember him? Tries to keep things normal. He throws feasts, honors the gods, sponsors athletic competitions. Spartan kids are trained young, hard, and without sentiment. But Helen is treated differently. She's not just a daughter, she's a future problem. Wearing perfection like armor, Tyndareus knows it. So does Lita, but no one says anything directly. Instead, they begin to train her in the only thing she'll ever really be allowed to control: presence. Helen learns to move without effort, speak without stuttering, hold a man's gaze long enough to make him doubt his own plans. And it works. At 12, she's already the subject of ballads. At 14, suitors begin arriving in waves, and not just locals. Greek royalty, sons of gods, legends in the making. Odysseus comes, sharp-tongued and clever. Menelaus arrives later, rich and awkward, but ambitious. Even Achilles' father shows up with half-serious offers and full-bodied wine. Tyndareus is overwhelmed. How do you choose a husband for a girl who might be half divine? How do you manage the politics of a face that already causes tension between kingdoms? That's when Odysseus, always angling, always calculating, suggests a plan, not for himself. He's already set his sights on Penelope. But he proposes a binding oath. All suitors must agree to protect the marriage of whoever is chosen. If any future threat comes for Helen, they must rally as one to defend her. It sounds noble. It's actually a strategic landmine, because that vow, that's the fuse that'll light the Trojan War. But that's still years off. Right now, you're watching Helen sit by her bedroom window, stroking the feather she plucked from the swan that never really left her dreams. She's too young to be this sad. Too young to feel the weight of being mythologized while still alive. And yet, she senses it already that she's not a girl anymore, but a symbol. Outside her room, the palace begins preparations for a marriage. That will never satisfy the myth. Tyndareus chooses Menelaus safe, politically advantageous, the brother of Agamemnon. Leda barely reacts, Helen nods. She's learned not to flinch. But at night, when the air grows thick with cicadas and the smell of olive groves, she whispers stories to herself about swans and rivers, and the kind of love that doesn't come with contracts or city-states. She doesn't say Zeus's name. Not out of fear. Just because saying it would make the memory too real. Tonight's historical intimacy tangent. Let's take you to 1st century Rome. There's a woman named Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, who, according to salacious sources, and boy did Roman historians love gossip, used to sneak out at night to work in a brothel under a fake name, not for money, for thrill. Some say it was slander, a male historian's fantasy. Others insist it was power, an empress indulging in anonymity and lust on her own terms. Either way, it forces you to question how stories are shaped, who writes them, and why women's sexuality always ends up being either weaponized or erased. Just like Leda's, just like Helen's. In Sparta, things settle. For now, Helen is married. The palace calms. But something's off. You feel it too, right? That undercurrent of wrongness. Like the myth is holding its breath, waiting to explode. Castor and Pollux leave to seek glory. Clytemnestra marries Agamemnon, yes, that Agamemnon. And Helen? She starts to dream of the sea, of ships, of cities far away, of a name she hasn't heard yet, but already makes her heart tremble. Paris. But that's another chapter. For now, the palace sleeps under moonlight. Helen lies still, her hand curled around a single feather. Somewhere in the night, a swan flies, silently over the rooftops, watching, or maybe it's just the wind. You wake in the middle of the myth, and something is wrong. The moon isn't quite right. It's too low, too heavy, like it's eavesdropping on things it shouldn't see. There's a chill in the palace tonight, and not the kind that comes from marble floors or drafty halls. This is the chill of fate getting curious, of stories slipping off script. You drift through the corridors like mist, past sleeping guards and flickering oil lamps toward Helen's chamber. She's not there. Her bed is empty, sheets undisturbed. And the window? Open. You step to it, heart pounding with a dread you can't name, and peer out into the dark. There across the olive grove, where the trees sway like gossiping old women, you see the silhouette of a girl and a stranger. His form is slender, feline, with a grace that speaks of royalty wrapped in shadows. You don't recognize him yet, but your bones do. That's Paris, Prince of Troy, and he's about to ruin everything. But rewind. Before we let Helen vanish into the night with a boy who smells like poetry and disaster, you need to understand the context, the slow burn of tension between gods and mortals that's been simmering ever since Zeus first flapped his ridiculous swan wings. Because what happened that day by the river wasn't just a divine affair, it was a trigger. A butterfly effect with a libido. And now, the gods are playing chess again. And this time, mortals are the pieces. Let's pull back the curtain on Mount Olympus for a moment, where the gods are watching like bored rich kids with too many divine privileges and not enough hobbies. Hera, still seething from Zeus's latest feathered escapade, has been plotting. She doesn't forget. She doesn't forgive. And she doesn't like that Helen, a literal product of Zeus's infidelity, is now the most celebrated woman in Greece. It's like watching your husband's love child get crowned prom queen at your high school reunion. Meanwhile, Aphrodite, goddess of love, chaos, and really bad judgment, is about to toss a golden apple into a divine bachelorette contest that will indirectly cause Helen to leave Sparta, start a war, and become the most unfairly blamed woman in literary history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back in the mortal realm, Helen sits beside Menelaus at royal banquets, smiling politely, drinking wine she barely tastes. She listens to court poets sing about her birth and the miracle of her face, while silently calculating how far the palace walls could carry her if she ran. Her husband isn't cruel, just dull, predictable, proud of her beauty in the way a collector is proud of an artifact he doesn't understand. And Helen? She's dying inside, slowly, quietly, with a smile that could start revolutions. That's when Paris arrives in Sparta. Handsome, yes, but it's more than that. He walks like he knows he's been chosen by fate, and in a way, he has. After a divine beauty pageant between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, judged by Paris himself, because of course, the young prince was promised the most beautiful woman in the world as a bribe from Aphrodite. That woman? Helen. Never mind that she's already married. Gods don't care about human paperwork. Paris shows up with diplomatic pretense, but it's the kind of performance everyone can see through. You do too. He looks at Helen like she's the final line of a poem that's haunted him for years. And Helen? She looks back. Here's where scholars squirm. Did she leave willingly? Was she enchanted? Was it love or abduction or something blurrier in between? Historians still argue whether Helen's departure was a calculated rebellion or divine manipulation. But you're watching it now, up close. And the truth is both messier and sadder. Helen doesn't bolt into Paris's arms. She hesitates. She dreams about it for weeks. She walks along the river where her mother once met a god disguised as a bird and wonders if madness runs in blood. One night, she touches the feather again, the one she's kept hidden since girlhood, and thinks about fate, about choice, about whether any of this was ever hers. And then, she leaves. No fanfare, no screams, just silk whispering against stone. As she slips through the corridors, her sandals barely making a sound, Paris waits by the gates, his face pale with the weight of what they're about to do. They ride fast, silent, chased not by soldiers, but by stories already sharpening their blades. And back in the palace, Menelaus wakes to a kingdom without its queen and a future splintering into myth. Meanwhile, in the underworld of fringe facts, here's one to twist your perception. In medieval Europe, some courts believed that sexual desire could be cured with the ingestion of powdered toad or crushed emeralds. Others recommended bloodletting or prayer. You wonder what they would have prescribed for Helen. A vow of silence? A stone corset? A different life? But none of that matters now. She's gone. And Sparta will never forgive her. But what about Leda? That's the question no one asks. What does it feel like to watch your daughter follow your footsteps into divine entanglement? To see your own blurred consent echoed in hers? Leda receives the news like a woman whose past just came home to roost. Some say she tears her garments, others that she retreats to a temple weeping. But one version, your favorite, says she simply walks back to the river where it all began, sits beside the reeds, and whispers, "So it begins again." And maybe she means the war, maybe she means the curse, or maybe she just means the endless cycle of women being turned into legends. Before they even get to be people. Up on Olympus, the gods are grinning. They've laid the groundwork. The war is inevitable. The mortals will tear each other apart over honor, betrayal, and the beauty of a woman who never asked to be born extraordinary. But for tonight, you're still with Helen, riding toward Troy. The wind in her hair, the future in her chest, and the distant beat of war drums thudding like a second heartbeat. She doesn't know what she's done, or maybe she does. Maybe that's why she doesn't look back. You're no longer in Sparta. You're not even on land anymore. You're on the deck of a ship, wood creaking beneath your feet, sails billowing. Like swollen lungs, the sea stretching out endlessly beneath a storm-colored sky. Salt stings your nostrils, And somewhere nearby, Helen leans over the edge, her hair caught in the wind like a golden flag of treason. The boat cuts through the Aegean like a blade, slicing her past from her future. You wonder if she feels free, or just cornered by different walls. Paris stands beside her, trying to hide his nerves beneath the arrogance of youth and prophecy. He has no idea what he's done. Or maybe he does, but believes destiny will cushion the fall. Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, but never mentioned the collateral damage, the kingdoms that would burn, the thousands who would die just so two people could pretend love was a shield against consequences. That's the thing with gifts from gods. They're always cursed in fine print. The ship tilts slightly as the wind shifts, and you get a flash of Helen's expression, quiet, unreadable, the look of someone already rehearsing the thousand ways she be blamed. Even now, she knows the stories will never be kind. They'll call her a seductress, a traitor, a siren who dragged men to their doom. No one will remember the night she stood on her balcony praying for silence, or the way her skin crawled under the weight of every gaze. Every bard who sang about her as if she were a prize goat dressed in pearls. You wonder what it would be like if Helen were allowed to write her own myth. Maybe she'd tell you she was tired, that being beautiful isn't the same as being powerful, that when she looked at Paris, she didn't see a God-given gift, she saw a window, and she jumped. They land in Troy at dusk. The city is massive, golden, arrogant in the way only cities untouched by war can be. The walls rise like promises, thick and high, and within them waits a royal court unprepared for what Helen brings with her. The moment they enter the gates, you can feel it tension like a plucked string. The Trojans stare, whisper, adjust their robes. Some bow, some scoff. Hecuba, the queen, does not hide her disdain. She looks at Helen the way a mother lion looks at the predator approaching her cubs. Helen sees it. She doesn't flinch. She's been stared at all her life. This is just sharper. Paris introduces her with all the pomp of a man convinced he's done the right thing. His father, Priam, listens, nods, says all the right things. But later that night, in the privacy of the royal quarters, he turns to his son and says, "She's beautiful, but beauty invites blood. It's not a curse, it's an observation, a quiet prophecy, older than any oracle." And outside the city, walls far across the sea, Sparta is burning with rage. Menelaus, stripped of his wife and his pride, has gone straight to his brother Agamemnon. You know Agamemnon, the one with the ego the size of a small continent, the hunger for legacy, the tendency to sacrifice first and apologize never. When Menelaus tells him what happened, Agamemnon doesn't just see betrayal, he sees opportunity. A pretext for war. A chance to gather all of Greece under one banner and march toward eternal glory. And revenge. But here's the twist, he doesn't do it alone. Remember that oath? The one Odysseus tricked all Helen's suitors into swearing years ago. It's time to cash that in. Across Greece, ships are summoned, swords polished, kings recruited. Ajax, Diomedes, Nestor, even Odysseus, who tries desperately to fake madness to avoid the draft, is dragged back into the chaos. And Achilles, young, lethal, beautiful like a lion mid-leap, is recruited by force, his mother weeping as he sails away, knowing he will never return. The fleet that forms is enormous. They say 1,000 ships, give or take poetic inflation. But the sea doesn't care for legends. The winds refuse to blow. The ships sit idle, and the gods watch with amusement. This is where Agamemnon decides to make a sacrifice. A real one. His daughter, Iphigenia. Yes, you heard that right. To appease Artemis, whose wrath has stilled the winds, Agamemnon lures his daughter to Aulis under the guise of marriage, then kills her. Just like that, the winds return, the ships sail. Helen is unaware, or maybe she's not. Maybe she feels it in her bones. the way women sometimes do when another girl is killed for the sins of men. Another blood offering for the beauty tax she never agreed to pay. And here's your strange historical sex interlude. In ancient India, the Kama Sutra wasn't just about positions. It was about timing, mood, even seasonal variations in desire. Monsoon sex was considered different than summer sex. Women were encouraged to choose lovers based on the alignment of stars and the depth of conversation. In some ways, the ancient world was more honest about intimacy than we are today. It wasn't just about pleasure, it was about politics, philosophy, and the rhythm of the cosmos. If only Paris had consulted a star chart before abducting the Queen of Sparta. Back in Troy, Helen is adjusting, slowly, carefully. She learns the language, memorizes the palace layout, watches the politics unfold like an opera. She becomes close with Hector, Paris's older brother, a man of reason, loyalty, and tragic foresight. He treats her with respect, not worship. He listens. They walk the gardens together, talk of philosophy, war, fate. Some say she loved him more than Paris. Others say she simply trusted him to see her as a human, not a trophy. Either way, she begins to sense what's coming. The storm gathering across the sea, the 1,000 ships moving closer every day. The army building like a wave too big to stop. And still, Paris kisses her. Still, he believes they can survive it. That love will protect them. But Helen? Helen isn't so sure. She's already seen what gods can do. She was born from a myth, raised in a palace of shadows, touched by divinity and cursed by story. And now she waits. Each day, she wakes wondering if this will be the morning the ships arrive, the morning the war begins, the morning the world decides whether she's worth dying for or just worth blaming. You wake to the sound of drums, not war drums, not yet, but the low, rhythmic throb of tension rolling in over the water like a fog no one dares name. Troy is breathing heavily now, its gates double guarded, its markets thinned of chatter. From her balcony, Helen watches the horizon, not because she expects ships today, but because she knows they're coming. She's known for weeks. Every night, her dreams are full of oars slicing through black water, of Greek armor catching moonlight. Like the gleam of fate. She doesn't tell Paris. He still believes they have time. He plays the lyre, writes her songs, murmurs promises between kisses as if they're charms against reality. But Helen? Helen keeps count. Of the soldiers sharpening spears, of the messages Priam receives and burns unread, of the glances between Hector and the council that mean, we're not ready. And still, the sky remains deceptively blue. The lull before calamity. It's a strange quiet. One that lets you see the daily life of Troy with painful clarity. Merchants still hawk grapes in the square. Children chase each other around statues of forgotten gods. Inside the palace, maids braid Helen's hair in long, intricate coils, as if beauty were armor. They say nothing to her face, but you hear them whisper in corners about her smile, her silence, her guilt. Some think she's a witch, others that she's a victim. Most simply resent her presence. No one dares insult her publicly. Of course, she is the queen's daughter-in-law, Paris's prized jewel. But Troy has already begun to decide that beauty. This sharp must cut someone eventually. And when it does, they plan to be ready. Hector watches it all unfold with grim clarity. Unlike his brother, he does not romanticize the gods. He does not believe this can end well. He begins to train harder, preparing soldiers, overseeing fortifications. He meets with elders, plans escape routes. But he never says these things aloud. To Helen, he merely invites her to walk with him through the gardens, past the fig trees and olive groves, where the air is heavy with the smell of late summer. Their conversations are quiet, elliptical. They talk about myths, astronomy, the philosophy of loyalty. Once, he asks her if she believes in fate. She looks at him for a long time before answering. I was born from a god disguised as a bird. She says, what choice did I ever have? And just like that, you realize something chilling. Helen is not just anticipating the war. She is preparing for it. Quietly, intellectually, emotionally. She has already accepted that Troy will burn. She has already started rehearsing how she will survive its ashes. Now step sideways. Briefly, to our historical sex detour. You've heard of courtly love, those tortured poetic romances in medieval Europe. But did you know that in 12th century, southern France, noble women led salons called courts of love? There, women judged poetry, advised men on matters of passion, and sometimes dictated rules for how desire should operate among the upper class. They elevated flirtation to ritual, heartbreak to performance. And yes, many of those women, especially Eleanor of Aquitaine, wielded real power from the velvet cushions of those candlelit chambers. Sex wasn't shameful. It was strategy. The line between courtship and politics? Razor thin. Back in Troy, Helen would have ruled such a court with terrifying grace. But here, her influence is quiet, informal. She's not writing rules. She's rewriting myths with her mere presence. You see it every time a visiting envoy stares too long. Every time a guard forgets his oath mid-sentence. Every time Paris places a hand on her waist like a man claiming territory. But she's no longer his, not really. Not in the way that matters. Helen has begun to drift emotionally, a slow severing. She smiles at Paris, still lets him trace her spine, still listens to his poems. But you can tell she's somewhere else now. Somewhere past longing. Somewhere on the edge of inevitability. And then, one morning it happens. A scout returns from the outer cliffs. The Greeks have arrived. The sea is boiling with ships. The sand near the bay glints with armor. The air in Troy collapses into silence so heavy it feels like morning. You watch the royal court react in stages: denial, fear, anger, strategy. Priam calls an emergency council. Hector leaves mid-meal. Paris grips his sword for the first time in weeks, his fingers unsure. And Helen? Helen stands still. You watch her face as she turns from the balcony and walks, slowly, with impossible calm, toward the war she's been blamed for long before it even began. What does she feel? Not fear, exactly. Not guilt. Something more like inevitability wearing. The mask of poise. She knows this war isn't really about her. It's about pride, revenge, power. She's the excuse, not the cause. A goddess's bribe gift, a king's excuse, a myth's trigger. And still, she'd be the one they name when the bodies start falling. And so the city prepares. Banners raised, weapons forged. Women weep in silence while men shout orders in the streets. Helen watches it all like someone watching her own funeral being arranged. And in that stillness, she does something curious. She writes a letter to her mother. No one ever mentions this version. No epic preserved it. But in some whispered, lost fragment of the myth, it said that Helen composed a single message to Leda left unsealed, never delivered. In it, she writes, I followed your wings. I didn't mean to. But they were the only map I had. You find her sitting by a brazier that night, watching the letter burn. She doesn't cry. She just stares into the flame like it's the only thing that sees her clearly. Then she stands, straightens her gown, and steps into her role once more. Not queen, not wife, not even woman, but symbol. There's a smell in the air now, thick and coppery, like iron mixed with thunder. You recognize it immediately, not because you've been here before, but because your instincts scream louder than memory. That's the scent of war, blooming. Just outside Troy's golden gates. The Greek army has arrived in full force, row after row of sun-drenched bodies, glinting like blades under the sky. From the battlements, the Trojan guards squint at the horizon and go quiet. They've never seen anything like this. Ships as far as the eye can reach, sails like stretched skin, armor catching light in a way that makes the ocean look like it's burning. You feel it too, the sheer unnatural stillness right before the first arrow flies. The way time holds its breath when history decides to pivot. Helen stands atop the walls now, watching. Her face unreadable, her hands perfectly still, the wind teasing strands of her hair into a silent frenzy. You want to ask what she's thinking, but you already know she's moved beyond thought. She's standing on the edge of becoming, that moment when a woman becomes a symbol whether she wants to or not. From here, you can see Menelaus in the Greek camp, his eyes fixed on the city like it owes him something. And Agamemnon beside him, smiling not because he wants his brother's wife back, but because he's finally found a reason to unleash the war he's been itching to start. It's not about Helen, it never was. It's about power, honor, legacy. Helen is just the spark. Someone else handed them. And now the flame is licking the walls. You drift through the palace like a shadow as Troy braces itself. Inside, the atmosphere's electric maids rushing, guards shouting, priests blessing armor with cracked fingers and shaking lips. Paris sharpens his sword for the first time since Helen arrived, fumbling over the whetstone like a boy pretending. To be a man, his hands were built for lyres, not blades. And deep down, he knows it. Hector? He's already donned his armor. Not for show, for readiness. You see him in the courtyard, drilling soldiers with the focus of a man who knows what's coming and wants to at least die prepared. That night, the gods begin to whisper louder, not in words, but in signs. A statue of Apollo cracks down the middle. A falcon drops dead mid-flight over the citadel. The moon turns red. You feel the tremor in your bones, like the universe hiccuped. And Helen? Helen doesn't flinch. She walks the palace halls like a woman rehearsing her own ghost, moving silently, eyes never straying from the windows that face the sea. She hasn't spoken to Paris since the ships appeared. Hasn't needed to. What could she possibly say? Sorry, I look like something worth killing for? Sorry your ego wrote a check your sword can't cash? You follow her to the temple of Aphrodite. It's deserted now, save for a single priestess sweeping ash from the altar. Helen kneels before the statue and lights a small flame, not because she believes the goddess will protect her, but because myths require gestures, and Helen knows how to perform. She's been performing since the day she was born from an egg, destined to be adored, cursed, and ultimately discarded. She whispers something you can't quite hear, her voice barely brushing the air. It sounds like, "Let it end quickly." Then she rises and walks away. Now let's take a detour, as promised, into another corner of history's erotic archives. In the royal courts of ancient Japan, the Heian period birthed a culture of aesthetic seduction so refined it makes our modern dating apps look like cave drawings. Lovers exchanged poems, handwritten on delicate paper with precise ink strokes. Judged not only on content, but on the handwriting, the scent of the paper, and even the time of delivery. Courtiers often wore layers of scented robes, so when they left a room, the fragrance lingered like a ghost of desire. Sex wasn't loud, or crude, it was a haiku. You had to earn it syllable by syllable. Helen would have thrived in such a court where presence was poetry and reputation was currency. Back in Troy, the first emissary arrives under white flag. Odysseus, of course. Who else? Silver-tongued, sharp-eyed, smelling like sea salt and schemes. He enters the palace like a man who already knows the answer, but wants to hear it out loud. He asks for Helen, politely, formally. He reminds everyone of the oath, the marriage, the insult. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. The power of his words lies in their calm. Paris answers first, as you expect. Bluster, pride, refusal. Hector remains silent. But then, Priam speaks not as a father-in-law, not as a king, but as an old man tired of gods playing dice with mortal lives. He looks at Helen, just once, and says, "Do you wish to return?" The room freezes. Even the shadows go still. Helen meets his gaze. Her voice is low, almost broken. Would it change anything? Odysseus smiles faintly. Maybe, maybe not. But history will say you had the chance. She doesn't respond. Odysseus leaves empty-handed. The war, now officially unpaused, begins its countdown. You wake the next morning to the sound of metal. Lots of it. Shields being distributed. Spears dragged across stone. Horses being fed their last meal. Troy is a hive of war prep now. And Helen, she's back on the walls, staring down at the man who once called her wife. Menelaus stands front and center, armor gleaming, face like a storm that's waited too long. Helen doesn't blink. If she's afraid, she hides it well. And then you realize something that stops your breath cold. She's not scared of Menelaus. She's scared of surviving this. Of being dragged back, not as queen, not even as wife, but as proof. As an excuse for a war no one will forget. And somewhere far above, the gods keep betting on the outcome. Ares sharpens his sword. Athena picks her side. Hera seethes. Aphrodite smirks. And Zeus? Zeus watches the pieces he set in motion the day. He turned into a swan and landed beside a river where one queen stood too still and one god flew too low. You've never heard silence like this before. It isn't peace. It's the kind of silence that roars inside your ribcage, pressing against your lungs as if the air itself doesn't want to be breathed. The field outside Troy is motionless. Both armies lined up like rival sculptures, shimmering. In bronze and leather, their spears upright like a forest waiting to fall. The sun hangs too low, casting shadows that stretch like omens. You scan the lines, and your eyes land on Helen again, still at the edge of the battlements, still unmoving. From down below, she probably looks like a marble goddess or a judgmental constellation. She doesn't blink. She's watching for who will break first. The standoff doesn't last. It never does. A single spear hurled maybe by accident, maybe. By intent cuts the sky like a shriek, and the war explodes. The noise is indescribable. Clash of metal, screams, horses panicking. Dust clouds rising like smoke signals to the gods. You flinch, even though none of it can touch you. It's all real, yet none of it is yours. Paris is in the thick of it, or rather on the fringes, doing his best to look like a warrior while avoiding actual combat. Hector is everywhere, ordering, fighting, protecting, bleeding. The Greeks push hard, the Trojans resist harder. And above them all, you realize the gods are now openly involved. Athena moves like lightning across the battlefield, whispering. Strategy into ears, redirecting spears mid-air. Ares bellows with joy as he swings invisible blades. The mortals don't see them, not fully, but they feel it. Every lucky dodge, every sudden surge of strength, every unearned survival, it's all divine interference. War isn't fair. It never was. Especially not when it's supervised by immortals playing blood-soaked chess. And Helen, still watching, still silent. You imagine what it must be like to be her, to see your choices echo outward as corpses, to know every fallen soldier will be traced back to the moment you said yes to a boy in the moonlight. Or maybe she never said yes. Maybe she just didn't. Say no fast enough. Either way, it's too late. She's no longer a woman. She's a war story with perfect cheekbones. Inside the city, panic begins to seep into the cracks. The markets shudder. Families hide in cellars. The temples flood with prayers and the smell of burnt offerings. And in the palace, Leda's legacy stares into a polished bronze mirror and whispers the names of the dead she doesn't yet know. It's unclear whether Helen feels guilt or grief, or just the weariness of being blamed for everything. Historians still argue whether she was a passive victim or a power player. But you, watching her from this close, know the truth is stranger. She's both. She's neither. She's something ancient wearing the face of a girl, and now a detour, a juicy one. In the decadent courts of the Mughal Empire, Emperors commissioned illustrated erotica, not just for titillation, but as manuals of emotional intelligence. That's right, art as emotional literacy. The Kama Sutra wasn't simply a sex guide. It was a philosophy of intimacy, with sections on how to woo, how to reconcile after fights, and even how to leave a lover with grace. Lovers wrote poems on lotus petals, left coded messages in jewelry, and believed that pleasure was sacred. Compare that to Paris, who wooed a queen by stealing her from her homeland under divine contract, and then promptly hid behind his older brother when things got violent. Not exactly emotionally literate. Back to the battlefield. You float past Achilles now, shirtless and shining with sweat, a demigod born for violence. He moves like hunger given human form. Next to him, Patroclus' closest companion, his mirror. His everything fights with a quiet rage, the kind that only comes when the person beside you matters more than yourself. Their bond? Let's just say it's intimate in ways that ancient texts either sanitized or romanticized, depending on the translator's agenda. Achilles doesn't care for Helen, doesn't care for Paris. He's here because Agamemnon insulted him, and now he wants blood. That's the absurdity of war. It's never really about the headline reason. It's always about pride, rivalry, grudges older than reason. Helen is just the excuse. A very beautiful, very convenient excuse. You drift back to the city walls. Helen hasn't moved, but Hector arrives beside her, helmet under one arm, chest rising and falling like a man who's been sprinting for hours and doesn't know if he's running toward safety or away from doom. They don't speak for a long time. Then he turns to her and asks, "Do you regret it?" It's not a judgment. It's a confession disguised as a question. Helen doesn't answer right away. Finally she says, "I regret being worth this much." And you feel it like a punch, that line, that truth. Because no one should be worth 1,000 ships. No one should be turned into a battle cry. That night, the fires are visible from every rooftop. The battlefield is a canvas of bodies and banners and broken weapons. The Trojans retreat for now. The Greeks set up camp, confident, patient. This war will not end quickly. You know that already. 10 years it will last, each season marked not by harvests or festivals, but by deaths and negotiations and stolen. Glances across spear tips, and Helen? She will endure all of it, some days hated, some days idolized, always misunderstood. She'll weave at her loom, waiting, watching, remembering. She'd be used as a bargaining chip, a scapegoat, a living prophecy. And through it all, she will remain impossibly intact, like marble that refuses to crack even when the world hammers it daily. One last image before sleep claims the city. A single swan feather floats down from the palace roof. No wind, no birds. Just a silent reminder of how it all began. Of Zeus, of Leda, of the river. Of how every war begins not with swords, but with stories. You step into Helen's dreams now, not because she invites you, but because you're part of her myth, like dust clinging to ancient silk. Her sleep is restless. Behind her closed eyes, cities burn again and again, each with a different name, each echoing the same scream. She dreams in fragments of feathers falling into wine, of eggs cracking open to reveal not babies but swords, of a voice she never heard in waking life whispering, "You were made for this." When she wakes, her first breath tastes like smoke. Her palms ache as if she's been gripping something too tightly. She looks down, they're empty, but the weight remains. You watch her rise from the silk-wrapped bed that once belonged to Trojan queens, her feet touching the cold stone floor like someone reluctant to be real. Her maids enter with routine precision water for washing, perfumes from Cyprus, layers of gowns stitched by hands that tremble more each day. Helen doesn't speak. She rarely does anymore. Why waste words when everyone around her has already rewritten her into something else? Outside, Troy tries to pretend it still has mornings. The sun still rises over the Dardanelles, lighting up red rooftops and marble colonnades, but everything feels borrowed now. The market's open, but no one haggles. The children play, but never. Far from home, Priam walks the halls with the weight of a dying civilization in his spine. Paris rehearses speeches in the mirror, convincing himself he's still a hero. And Hector? He trains, fights, listens. He's becoming the soul of the city without realizing it. Every soldier in Troy watches him the way a drowning man watches the shoreline. And still, they all orbit her. Helen, the epicenter. The beautiful catastrophe. Today, she receives a visitor. A woman, older, stern eyes, a widow of some noble house. She doesn't bow, doesn't compliment. Just walks in, stops a few paces from Helen, and says, "My son died yesterday. He was 17. They said he died smiling. I hope that's true. I don't blame you." Helen doesn't move. "But they will," the woman continues. "When this is over, they'll remember you, not him." Then she leaves, no curses, no screaming. Just the clean wound of a truth no one knows how to dress. And you feel it crack inside Helen, not visibly, not yet, but there, in the way her. Breath stutters when the door closes. Later that evening, she finds herself in the garden alone, barefoot, the grass dewy and cold against her solace. She walks to the edge of the reflecting pool and stares into it. Her own face looks back, unnervingly calm. You wonder what she sees. Her mother, maybe? The moment by the river? The egg, the feathers, the lie that turned into lineage. And then, almost too softly to catch, she says, "Was I ever mine?" Now for something beautifully bizarre. Did you know that in ancient China's Han Dynasty, there was an erotic tradition involving bed books illustrated with not only human couples, but occasionally mythical pairings, including phoenixes and, yes, swans. One such scroll was titled The Harmony of Beaks, a poetic metaphor suggesting that true union required the impossible, alignment of desire, power, and fate. It's eerie how close that feels to Helen's life. Harmony? No, but collision? Absolutely. The war creeps on. Not like a storm now, but like erosion, steady, unforgiving. The Greeks build siege engines. Troy builds walls within walls. The gods grow restless. Artemis, bored of men and their whining, retreats to her forests. Aphrodite meddles, healing Paris after each shameful duel. Athena sides with the Greeks, sharpening her intellect into spears. And Hera never forgets betrayal. She doesn't care if Helen was willing or tricked. All she sees is another wound in her marriage, another symbol of Zeus's appetite wrapped in mortal flesh. And speaking of Zeus, where is he? Absent, mostly. Perhaps watching. Perhaps bored now that the spark he lit has become a forest fire. He rarely interferes once the games begin. That's always been his pattern: create chaos, then disappear. Leda learned that early. And now Helen has too, but there's a rumor, whispered between priests, hidden in the verses of a bard, too drunk to self-censor. It says that on the night Helen left Sparta, a white swan was seen flying above her ship, circling 3 times before vanishing into the clouds. Omen? Coincidence? Metaphor? Historians still argue, but you believe it. Of course you do. The gods never really leave. They just wait to be remembered. Back in the palace, Paris bursts into Helen's chambers one afternoon, armor clattering, cheeks flushed with indignation. "They say I'm not a warrior," he snaps. "They say I should give you back." Helen looks up from her loom. "And should you?" she asks, her voice almost bored. He doesn't answer, just storms out. You can't help but laugh, just a little. The boy who once crossed oceans for love now pouts like a child denied dessert. Helen doesn't laugh. She goes back to her weaving, but she changes the thread color. From crimson to ash. And in the midst of all this tension, a moment of stillness. A night, cool, clear. Helen sits on the palace roof, hair unbound, fingers stained with fig juice. She gazes at the stars, the same constellations Leto once watched beside a very quiet river. She hums a lullaby you don't recognize, but it's old, older than language. Then she says, "I wish they'd remember my silence, not my face. You write that down." Because myths forget nuance. But you don't. You wake to music, not the gentle lyre or the war songs echoing through camps, but something haunting and wrong. It's the sound of laughter from the Greek tents at dawn. Laughter so loud it ripples across the plain and makes the walls of Troy hum with foreboding. You drift down closer, past rows of sleeping men, past scattered helmets and blood-stained shields, until you reach the center of the raucous. And there he is, Menelaus, laughing, the kind of laugh a man makes when he knows exactly where to plunge. The blade. He's holding something in his hands, a small carved figurine of Helen, made from ivory, too perfect to be innocent. He's showing it to the others, turning it in the torchlight, smiling like a wolf. "I still remember the curve of her shoulder," he says, "as if I carved it myself." The others laugh too. But Odysseus doesn't. He watches Menelaus, with the expression of a man taking notes for a tragedy not yet written. Back in Troy, the city breathes shallowly. Helen walks the halls with a grace that borders on ghostly, her presence too quiet, too precise. Her hair is pinned back in a style older than the city itself. She doesn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, her words are like soft knives, elegant, but sharp enough to draw blood. Today, she visits the temple of Apollo alone. The priests don't stop her. They part like water, unsure if she's holy or cursed. She walks barefoot across the cold mosaic floor, the sun breaking through the temple's oculus and lighting her in such a way that for a moment, you're convinced she's not mortal. She kneels before the altar, touches the stone, and whispers, "If I could burn it all down to stop what's coming, I would." That night, there's a banquet, an attempt to maintain morale. Paris drinks, too much, again. Hector broods in silence. Again, Helen is seated between two generals who flinch every time she moves, as if proximity to her might invite divine punishment. One of them drops his cup when she looks at him directly. The other asks her, half-jokingly, what it's like to be the most famous woman alive. She smiles, cold and curved. It's like being a weapon that never gets to choose its target. No one speaks for the rest of the meal. Let's step into another era for a second. In the Ottoman Empire, within the secretive walls of the harem, women weren't just concubines or ornaments. They were tacticians, educators, and often the real power behind the throne. The sultan's mother, the valid sultan, was often the most politically influential woman in the empire. Sex wasn't just pleasure, it was leverage, legacy, empire building. The women of the harem were trained in music, language, philosophy, and the art of ruling from the shadows. Helen, had she been born in that world, might have ruled half the empire without lifting a sword, just with a glance, a phrase, a carefully timed silence. But Troy is not Constantinople. Here, beauty is suspicion. Power must bleed to be respected. You return to the walls. The air is different tonight, tense, electric, too still. You can sense it before the scouts confirm it. The Greeks are moving, not attacking, posturing, a test, a show of force. In response, Priam calls a council. Everyone speaks at once. Paris insists they hold firm. Hector proposes negotiations. The generals argue tactics. Helen watches in silence until one of the younger officers, turns to her and says, "What do you think, my lady?" The room freezes. She's not usually asked. But now all eyes land on her. She stands, slowly, like someone rising. Not from a chair, but from a grave. "I think," she says, "if men spent half as much time solving peace as they do performing war, this room wouldn't be full of ghosts." No one dares reply. She leaves the room without waiting for dismissal. Later, That evening, she meets Hector on the palace roof. He's wearing a new wound on his arm, a deep gash from training. She doesn't ask how he got it. He doesn't offer. Instead, they sit together in silence, watching the Greek fires flicker in the distance. Finally, he says, "I'm scared." "Helen, it's not a confession, it's an offering." She nods. "So am I, but not of dying, of surviving." That line lingers. It won't leave you, because it's not just her fear, it's yours too. The fear of being the one left behind, to clean up history's wreckage. The one turned into a symbol for choices made in your name. The one who lives while legends die. In the camp, Achilles sharpens his blade. His armor gleams under the moonlight. He hasn't joined the fight yet, still furious at Agamemnon, still holding his wrath like a lover he can't quit. Patroclus watches from a distance, knowing better than to interfere. But even he senses the shift. War is close now. You can feel it in the way the earth hums under your feet, like a beast about to wake. And then, an omen. In the dead of night, a fire breaks out in one of the temples. Not caused by lightning, not sabotage, just spontaneous flame. The priests call it divine displeasure. Some whisper it's a sign that Helen must be returned, or Troy will fall. Priam does not believe it, but the people are starting to. Whispers grow louder. Glances more hostile. Helen walks through the palace like a woman already halfway exiled. You follow her into her chambers. She stands by the window, tracing her fingers along the glass. "I was never a wife," she murmurs. "Never a daughter. Just an echo of someone else's story. You want to tell her she's more. But the truth is, you don't know if she is. Not anymore. It starts with a peacock feather. Not a battlefield, not a sword, just a single feather. Gleaming green and gold, found tucked into Helen's pillow one morning before dawn. She stares at it for a long time. Long enough for the candle beside her bed to burn low and spill wax across her palm. She doesn't flinch. The peacock, sacred to Hera, is no ordinary bird. It's a divine signature, a calling card. Helen knows exactly what it means. Hera is watching now. The queen of Olympus, mother of grudges, wife to the king of swans, has entered the chat. And when Hera watches, it's not out of affection, it's out of fury. You see, this war isn't just a mortal mess. It's a celestial turf war, and Helen? She's the smoking crater between heaven's fractured egos. She doesn't tell anyone about the feather. Not Paris, who's still convinced his charm will win the war. Not Priam, who wakes each day a little more bent under the weight of decisions that have no clean answers. Not even Hector, whose kindness she's begun to trust more than she should. Instead, she burns it, quietly, over a small bowl of olive oil and salt. The smoke rises like incense, and for a moment, just a flicker, you swear you hear a woman's laugh, cold, triumphant, somewhere between a goddess and a guillotine. Outside, Troy prepares for another siege. The Greeks are trying a new tactic, cutting off supply lines. They burn farmland, poison wells, kidnap traders. The slow kind of siege, designed not for glory, but for attrition. It's a strategy invented by men who don't need to see the enemies face to ruin them. Inside the city, food grows scarce. Tempers shorter. Helen watches as breadlines form in the agora, noble women quietly trading jewelry for sacks of barley. A child collapses in the street. A dog is chased down and butchered. And everywhere she goes, she hears it. Her name hissed like a hex, not to her face, not yet, but she feels it like a bruise. That night, she finds herself back at the river, yes. That river, the one from her mother's myth. The one where Zeus fell from the sky like a lie in feathered form. There's no one there now, just reeds and a slow current that murmurs secrets to no one in particular. She kneels by the water and stares at her reflection. The face looking back is familiar but wrong. Too still, too symmetrical. The kind of face that doesn't age, doesn't break, just waits to be blamed. What would you have done? She asks, maybe to the water, maybe to Leda. There's no answer. Just the rustle of reeds and the sound of something unseen swimming slowly out of frame. Meanwhile, let's hop over to the court of Catherine the Great. You know her, the Empress of Russia, who ruled longer than any woman before her, who modernized her empire, who had a legendary appetite for art, politics, and yes, romance. But the real scandal wasn't her lovers, it was her agency. She chose them, she dismissed them, she ruled them. Her boudoir was her cabinet, her alliances sealed not with ink but intimacy. Some courtiers called her dangerous, others called her divine, but all agreed she was never the one being seduced. And maybe that's the real heresy. Helen, by contrast, has never been allowed that control. Her lovers choose her. Her fate chooses her. Even her legend chooses her. She's a goddess with no altar of her own. Back in Troy, a delegation is formed. Under pressure from the people, Priam sends envoys to the Greek camp. Another offer, another plea. Return Helen, they say, and the war can end. Paris refuses, again. But this time, Helen hears about it. She confronts him in the corridor outside the war room. No raised voice. Just one sentence. What would you do if it were your sister behind those walls? Paris doesn't answer. He walks away. That's when she knows he's already lost the city. Not with a sword. With cowardice. A few days later, Hector finds her in the garden, speaking to a child, one of the palace pages, maybe 7 or 8, asking her if the Greeks really came because of her. She smiles gently and says, "They came because men want reasons to kill each other. I just make it easier." Hector waits until the child is gone, then sits beside her. "There's talk," he says. "People want you gone. They think if we give you back, they'll leave us alone." Helen doesn't argue. Would they? She asks. Would Menelaus take me back and stop the war? Would Agamemnon abandon his glory campaign? Would Achilles lay down his spear? Hector is quiet. No, he admits, but they want something to blame. And so she offers him something else. "Let me speak to them," she says. "Let me walk to the Greek camp, alone." He looks horrified. "They'd kill you," she shrugs. Then at least someone might stop fighting long enough to notice. But it doesn't happen. Priam forbids it. The court erupts. The priests declare it sacrilege. Paris paces and mutters about honor and Helen. Helen returns to her chamber and tears every dress from her wardrobe, every gift from the palace, every silk and gem and golden hairpin. She sits in the middle of it, barefoot, and begins to sew a single gown. Rough fabric, dark color, no embellishment. The kind worn by mourners or refugees. Or women who know they might soon be remembered as statues, not voices. In that moment, you feel it shift. Something deeper than history. You realize she's no longer trying to survive the story. She's rewriting it, quietly, deliberately. One stitch at a time. You hear the laughter before you see the scene, and it stops you cold. Not joyous laughter. This is different. Mocking, shrill, echoing off the stone halls of Troy like a blade dragging across glass. You follow the sound, weaving through shadowed columns and anxious whispers, until you find it. A gathering of nobles, mostly men, all flushed with drink and something darker. At the center stands a blindfolded performer in a makeshift toga. One hand clutching a fake golden apple, the other pressed dramatically to their heart. Who is the fairest? They cry in falsetto, then stumble toward a crude sculpture of Helen fashioned from candle wax and horsehair. The crowd roars. They've made a play of it now. Her myth is parody, her face a costume they can pass around. Like a wine cup. You stand there, watching, waiting for the air to shift. And then it does. Because Helen enters the room. She doesn't shout, doesn't demand. She just walks through them, silent, eyes locked on the caricature, and slowly without. Breaking pace lifts the wax figure into her arms and throws it into the nearest brazier. The hiss of melting flesh-colored wax cuts the air, and no one laughs. No one dares. She turns once, just once, to the crowd and says, "If you must burn something, let it be real." Then she walks away, leaving only smoke and shame behind. That's Helen now, not the ornament, not the prize, but the reckoning. But let's rewind the lens a little. Not all gods play the long game like Hera or Zeus. Some have smaller roles, stranger stories. Take Pan, the goat-footed god of lust and rural chaos. According to a lesser-known tale, he once chased a nymph named Syrinx to the edge of a river, where she begged the water to save her. The gods, in a twisted act of mercy, transformed her into reeds. Pan, heartbroken, cut the reeds into pipes, creating the pan flute. It's the kind of love story ancient myths excel at. Unwanted pursuit, forced transformation, and then eternal possession disguised as art. You wonder if Helen knows this story. Probably. She reads everything. But what would she make of it? That even in Escape, a woman becomes music for a man to play? Back in Troy, something has shifted. The soldiers murmur more. The citizens glance sideways when she walks by. Even the palace guards keep one hand near their swords. You hear it whispered, "Now Helen of Troy, the cursed queen, the doomed beauty." They blame her for the siege, for the famine, for the fires. As if she set the ships herself. As if her face launched anything without being used first. And through it all, Paris sulks, more distant by the day. His ego wounded deeper than his body ever was. He doesn't speak to Helen unless others are around. And when he does, it's with the brittle sharpness of a man who knows he's lost control of the very thing he once stole. She no longer waits for him. She no longer waits for anyone. Instead, she walks the battlements, talks to guards, asks their names, brings them bread when rations run low. Some refuse, some bow. Most just stare, unsure whether to thank her or curse her. One old soldier, missing an eye and 3 fingers, mutters, "If I die, I hope it's not in her name." Helen hears it. She doesn't blink. "I hope none of you die in my name," she replies. "I didn't ask for it." And suddenly, you see a sliver of something unexpected. Not sympathy, but understanding. The soldier nods just once. The gods may play chess, but mortals? Mortals recognize each other's damage. Let's detour again, ancient Mesopotamia this time. The asterisk sacred. Marriage asterisk ritual. Once a year, the king of the city would symbolically mate with a high priestess of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, to ensure fertility and cosmic harmony. It was theater, yes, but also theology. Their union wasn't just physical, it was political, astronomical, mystical. The woman became divine for a night. The man, a god in her presence. But always it was the goddess who chose. The ritual failed without her consent. A stark contrast to Helen's myth, where her choices are rewritten by men desperate. To preserve the illusion of power. Back in Troy, word spreads. Achilles is back on the battlefield. He's killed Hector. And not just killed, dragged his body around the Greek camp for days, desecrating it in a rage so hot even the gods turned their faces away. You watch Priam break. The proud king falls to his knees before the gods, then before his council, and finally unthinkably before Achilles himself, begging for his son's body. Achilles, hollowed out by grief for Patroclus, agrees. And in that brief flicker of mercy, something in Helen shatters. She's alone in her chamber when the body is returned. She waits until nightfall. Then she enters the room where Hector's body lies, still draped in oils and linen, surrounded by flickering lamps. She stands over him, silent, then says, "You were the only one who ever asked me what I wanted." She takes a single lock of her hair, cuts it with a dagger, and places it in his hand. A gesture so old, no one remembers what it means anymore. But you understand, it's not love, it's honor. The kind offered too late, too softly. That night, she dreams of swans again. But not graceful, not divine. These are storm-racked, bedraggled things, wing-deep in blood, unable to fly. One of them looks up at her and whispers, "Was it worth it?" She doesn't answer. She wakes to the sound of drums that the war is far from over. But Helen? She's no longer waiting for it to end. She's already begun writing the part they'll forget to tell, the part where she lived, the part where she endured, the part where the girl born from an egg learned how to walk through fire and keep her name intact. It starts with wings, not the soft whisper of feathers, but the frantic, chaotic thrum of flight in a sky that feels too close. You look up, and the sky above Troy is seething with birds, hundreds, maybe thousands, spiraling in circles like a living storm. Crows, gulls, hawks, all screaming as if the heavens themselves are cracking open. The citizens pour into the streets, staring, shielding their eyes. In the temples, priests scramble for omens. In the palace, silence clots the air like smoke. Helen watches from the balcony, her hand gripping the edge until her knuckles bloom white. One bird dives lower than the rest, a swan. Just one. White, pristine, impossibly still amid the chaos, gliding through the maelstrom like it doesn't belong. And of course, it doesn't. You know what it means. So does Helen. The old myths weren't subtle. Birds were always more than birds. They were watchers, messengers, harbingers. And swans? They were transformation itself. Zeus wore feathers to seduce her mother. Now this one circles above her like a memory reincarnated, a reminder that no matter how far she's come, the gods are never really done with her. It lands near the temple of Apollo and disappears into the crowd. Helen says nothing, but something changes in her face. Not fear, not surprise, something colder. Something final. That same day, a small group of elders from Troy gathers in secret. You follow them, of course, through the winding back corridors, down to an unused storeroom lit only by torchlight. They argue in hushed tones. Some want to exile Helen. Some suggest surrender. One man proposes sacrifice. Yes, that word. He says maybe if they offer her, the gods will lift the siege. Maybe Menelaus will take her. Maybe the Greeks will stop. No one agrees, not yet. But you see it in their eyes. The seed has been planted. Helen is no longer a queen. She's a bargaining chip. A scapegoat. A human apology. But Troy isn't the only city that sees birds as omens. Let's detour for a moment to ancient Gaul, where druids would read the future in the flight of ravens. One chieftain reportedly postponed battle for 3 days because a crow circled his camp 3 times. In Rome, augurs built entire careers deciphering bird patterns. Left was bad. Right was good, unless it was a goose, in which case everything flipped. Birds weren't symbols. They were sentences. Messages from the divine written on wings. So when you see that swan again, this time perched on the steps of the palace, still watching, you start to wonder what it's trying to say. That night, Helen doesn't sleep. Instead, she wanders the palace grounds, barefoot again, her feet tracing the marble paths like a ritual. She moves through moonlight like someone listening for a voice just out of reach. When she reaches the garden, the swan is waiting. Not close, not threatening, just there, watching. She approaches. Slowly, carefully. You watch her kneel, not in reverence, not in fear, but in recognition. "Was it always you?" she whispers. "Did I ever have a choice?" The swan tilts its head, doesn't answer. She reaches out, but before her fingers touch its feathers, it flies. One powerful motion. Gone. And all that's left is a single feather, caught in the folds of her gown. The next morning, the rumors explode. Someone claims they saw Helen speaking to a god. Someone else says she summoned the birds. A third says She disappeared for hours and returned glowing. The stories tangle like ivy fast wild, impossible to uproot. And in the center of them all, Helen walks the halls as if nothing happened. That's her power now. She doesn't deny, doesn't explain. Just exists, like a flame that refuses to flicker. And Paris? He's slipping, fast. His body is still strong, but his confidence has withered into something petty and desperate. He accuses Helen of treachery, of witchcraft, of whispering to gods behind his back. She doesn't react. That's what infuriates him the most. One night, in a fury, he throws a goblet across the room. It shatters at her feet. She doesn't flinch, just looks down at the mess and says, "It's only broken if you meant to keep it." Then she walks out, leaving him in a room full of wine and shame. Now for our fringe erotic history of the evening ancient Norse sagas. Did you know that some Viking love charms involved binding runes into swan feathers and hiding them under a lover's bed? They believed swans were connected to fertility, prophecy, and the unknowable will of fate. Love wasn't just emotional or physical. It was magical, dangerous. In one saga, a shield maiden seduces a warrior by offering him a cloak sewn with feathers. He dreams of flight that night, and by morning, swears fealty to her alone. Seduction, in the old stories, wasn't about pleasure. It was about transformation, power. Back in Troy, the tension coils tighter, supplies run lower, the people grow restless, and the gods, it seems, are circling again. Helen receives a message delivered by a trembling boy with dirt on his knees and fear in his eyes. The message is short. 4 words. He knows. He's coming. There's no signature, no explanation. But Helen reads it 3 times. Then she folds it neatly and places it under her pillow. She doesn't speak of it. Not to Paris, not to Priam, not even to her reflection. You follow her the next day as she visits the temple again. Not to pray, to wait. She sits on the steps as children play nearby, oblivious to their city's slow decay. A merchant approaches, offering figs. She declines. A priest nods. She nods back. Everything feels quiet. Too quiet. And then, from the crowd, a stranger steps forward, cloaked, hooded. You recognize him before she does. Menelaus, inside the city. Somehow, you expect her to run, to scream, to call the guard. She does none of those things. She stands, walks to him, stops 1 pace away. They stare. Neither speaks. Not for a long time. Finally, she says, "Did you come for me?" His voice is cracked from travel, dust, and time. "I came for what's mine." She doesn't look away. "Then you came for a ghost." He reaches for her, but she steps back. "You left that version of me in Sparta. This one doesn't belong to anyone." And then he vanishes, melting back into the crowd, just a whisper of what once was. No one else saw him. Or if they did, they won't say. But Helen returns to the palace, changed, quieter, sharper. That night, she doesn't dream of birds. She dreams of cities drowning in fire. And in the smoke, a swan with no eyes dotted begins with a voice. Not loud, not commanding. Just steady, familiar, dangerously calm. A servant in the palace whispers it first, then a soldier near the gates. Then the merchants in the agora, all repeating it like a spell that grows heavier each time it's spoken. The gods are rewriting the story. You feel it before anyone explains. Something has changed. Not just the air, or the tides, or the brittle tension that's hung between the Greeks and Trojans like a thread pulled too tight for too long. No, this is deeper, myth deep, fate deep. You see it in the way the sky looks a fraction too green in the afternoon, or how the statues sweat during the full moon, or how dreams now feel like prophecies rather than memories. And you especially see it in Helen. She's begun moving like someone who knows the ending deliberate, detached, not defeated, just done with illusion. Today, she walks the palace corridors wrapped not in silk, but in a coarse wool cloak, unadorned, gray as storm water. She passes by court dancers practicing their routines for a banquet that may never happen, generals too tired to posture, nobles who no longer meet her gaze. The city is folding in on itself, and she walks through it like smoke. Her presence isn't questioned now, it's endured, tolerated, feared, and yet none of it touches her anymore. You're closer to her than anyone, and even you can't tell if she's ascending into myth or shedding it like a skin. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, the gods are restless. Hera has stopped pretending to be impartial. She stands behind Agamemnon, now her hands ghosting over his crown, whispering revenge not just for Paris's theft, but for every humiliation Zeus ever dragged her through. Athena leans in beside her, fingers curled around the hilt of reason sharpened into wrath. And Aphrodite? She remains smug, coiled like a cat, watching her promises backfire with the satisfaction of someone who knows chaos is more seductive than order. The gods don't argue anymore. They maneuver, they meddle. And below them, mortals bleed for stories. Bigger than themselves, Helen finds herself summoned again, not by Priam or Paris, but by the poets. A gathering of them, desperate to finish their epics, to capture her before the ending comes. They ask her questions like arrows. Do you feel? Guilt? Was it worth it? Would you change anything? She answers none of them. Instead, she offers one line. If you're writing me down, write me true or write me gone. Then she leaves them to argue over syntax and symbolism. They will, of course, ignore her entirely. That's how legends work. The woman never gets the final edit. Later that night, Helen finds Hector's armor laid out in the hall of memory, polished to a blinding shine. She kneels beside it, touches the chest plate. Her fingers leave no smudge. You sense her speaking, not aloud, but inward. A quiet conversation with a man who once saw her clearly. She places a ribbon beside the armor, one no one will recognize. The color of twilight. A secret gift for the only man in Troy who treated her like more than prophecy. Let's spin the globe for a moment. 13th century Cambodia. Angkor Wat. In the temples, sandstone carvings depict Apsaras, divine dancers frozen mid-twirl, their hands curved like lotus petals, their eyes downcast in eternal serenity. Scholars debate their origins. Were they real women, priestesses, concubines, spirits? Some believe they were based on royal dancers who performed sacred rites, balancing beauty with divinity, movement with meaning. They were neither entirely mortal nor divine, but something in between, a living prayer. Helen would understand. Them. She too is always mid-twirl, never quite landing, always performing. Even when no one applauds. Back in Troy, a new rumor spirals. Helen has a double, a shadow, a spirit conjured by the gods to take her place. Some say the real Helen never came to Troy at all, that she remained in Egypt, hidden away, while the Greeks and Trojans slaughtered each other for a phantom. It's absurd, obviously, but also deliciously plausible. You hear guards whisper it on night patrol. You hear priests discuss it in cryptic metaphors. One boy swears he saw two Helens at dawn, walking opposite directions through the garden. When confronted, he simply says, one was breathing, the other wasn't. Helen hears the rumor too. She smiles. Let them wonder, she says. It's the closest thing to freedom I've had. And you realize what she's doing. She's fracturing the myth on purpose, multiplying herself, becoming impossible to pin down. If they can't define her, they can't kill her. If they don't know which version of her they hate, then maybe she survives them all. Paris doesn't like it. Not that he's ever really understood her, but now she's slipping through his fingers like water. He tries to reclaim her the only way he knows, with gifts, gold, perfume, a new necklace shaped like a flame. She accepts them all, wordless, then locks them in a chest she never opens again. When he asks why she's distant, she finally says, because I'm not a trophy. and you were never the hero. Meanwhile, in the Greek camp, the gods whisper into dreams. Odysseus sees a woman made of smoke. Menelaus dreams of a river turning to wine, then blood, then feathers. Agamemnon wakes each night to a voice saying, "You will burn for her, but not with her." Even Achilles, detached as he is, finds himself carving her name into wood absent-mindedly, unsure whether it's a battle cry or a curse. And you? You stay close to Helen, sensing that time is unraveling. She's begun speaking in riddles, lighting candles without reason, sleeping with her eyes half open. The myth is catching up to her, or maybe she's finally stepping ahead of it. She says things like, "Stories don't end. They echo, and I am not an answer. I am the question you were afraid to ask." She isn't hiding anymore. She's haunting. Intentionally. One morning, she walks to the center of the palace and stands beneath the oculus, the same one that lit her first temple visit. The sun pours over her, and she says to no one, "Tell them this. I did not ask for the apple. I was the orchard." Then she turns and disappears into the shadows of a corridor that shouldn't exist. When you follow, she's already gone. It begins with the sound of breaking glass, not dramatic, not shattered with fury, but soft, precise. The sound of something once perfect being undone one quiet crack at a time. You turn your head and there it is, a goblet rolling gently across the stone floor of the palace. Its stem snapped, its wine dark and sticky like old blood. No one in the room moves. The council has gone silent. Even Paris doesn't speak. The tension is thick enough to swallow, because the question has just been asked. The one everyone has been circling for months, but never dared to say aloud. Should Helen be returned? The words hover in the air like smoke. No one looks at her, not directly. But you see it, the flickers of guilt, fear, calculation glancing off her skin like hail, and she doesn't move at all. She lets the silence stretch, not out of pride, but because she knows what happens next depends on who flinches first. It's Priam who speaks. His voice isn't strong anymore. It shakes, brittle as dry leaves. If she is the cause, then perhaps she is the cure. There's no emotion in it, just weariness. A king unthreading his last remaining hope. But Paris still clings to illusion. They came for pride, not for her, he insists. They would find another reason if we sent her back. And Hector, if he were still alive, might have found a third way. But Hector is ash now, and ashes don't negotiate. Helen finally speaks. "I am not an offering," she says, "and I am not a key." Then she stands quietly and walks out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed. The men argue long after she's gone, but none of them will admit that the war is no longer about her. It's about saving face, preserving honor, protecting the story they've already started telling themselves. That night, Helen walks alone to the roof of the palace. The city beneath her is dying in whispers, cracked stones, empty wells, prayers that taste like desperation. She leans against the balustrade, wind tugging her cloak, eyes scanning the Greek camp fires in the distance. And then, out of nowhere, she laughs. Just once, a small, sharp sound. "They'll blame me for this too," she murmurs. "For laughing while cities fell." You want to reassure her, to tell her that history has room for truth. But it doesn't. You know it doesn't. History devours women like her. Let's swerve to another past for a moment. In medieval France, a manuscript known as the Romance of the Rose described beauty as a fortress to be besieged, a garden to be penetrated, a secret to be stolen. In that world, women weren't wooed, they were conquered. Courtship was battle, and every no was a wall to be broken. The metaphor poisoned centuries. It still does. Helen knows it intimately. She's not a fortress. She's the battlefield. And then comes the prophecy. A seer, long ignored by the court, appears in the marketplace screaming of fire and wooden beasts and mouths that swallow soldiers. The people mock him, of course. They've heard too many false alarms. But Helen hears him, and something in his voice cuts deeper than fear. It sounds like fate cracking its knuckles. In the Greek camp, the mood is shifting too. Menelaus has grown quieter, less righteous. He doesn't speak Helen's name anymore. He speaks of logistics, siege strategy, weather, as if removing her from his mouth might remove her from his memory. Odysseus, however, watches everything, still calculating, still waiting for the right moment to tip the balance. He dreams of a horse, not a real one, a structure, hollow, full of secrets. And when he wakes, the plan is born. You don't know this yet, but Troy's story is almost done, not with a bang, but with a gift. That's how most myths end, not with truth, but with symbols. And Helen, she senses it. She stands before a mirror that night, her fingers brushing the glass. Would it have mattered, she whispers, if I'd been ugly? You know the answer, of course you do, but you won't say it. Not now. Not when she's already breaking into too many versions of herself to keep track. Now for our fringe tale of ancient intimacy. In Renaissance Italy, courtesans often wielded more social power than noblewomen. They were educated, witty, multilingual. Some hosted salons that doubled as political gatherings. Veronica Franco, one of Venice's most famous, wrote poetry that blended eroticism with biting social critique. She once said, "My body has been a kingdom, ruled by kings who thought they owned it." You imagine Helen might have smiled at that. The next morning, the sky above Troy turns the color of old bruises. Helen walks the city like a ghost in her own legend. The people no longer whisper. They just look, not with anger, not with sympathy, just exhaustion. She returns to her chamber and begins packing a small bundle. No jewels, no silk, just the basics. When a handmaiden asks where she's going, she replies, "Somewhere they won't recognize my name." The girl doesn't understand. How could she? Helen's name is older than her own breath. And then, just as she steps into the courtyard, a shout rises from the gates. A gift has arrived. A wooden horse. Gigantic, imposing, carved with symbols no one can read. A peace offering, the Greeks claim. The Trojans debate. Some say burn it. Some say worship it. Helen says nothing. She just stares at it, long and hard. Then, softly, almost too softly to hear, she mutters, "It's never the obvious thing that kills you." You look at her now, standing in the shadow of the gift that will end her city, and you realize this was always the shape of the myth. Not just beauty, not just war, but betrayal hidden inside reverence. Helen was never the fire. She was the flame they lit to see their own destruction. It starts with footsteps, not many, just a few, but they echo through the palace like thunder in a cathedral. You follow them instinctively, pulled by the hush that follows them, the kind of silence that knows it's standing on a fault line. And then you see her. Helen, walking barefoot across the marble, carrying nothing but a small satchel, and her name still sharp, still dangerous, still not hers. She doesn't look back, doesn't need to. Behind her, Troy is unraveling. Before her, destiny is stretching its fingers. The wooden horse looms behind the city gates now, watching, waiting. A gift too heavy to be generous, too silent to be safe. Everyone feels it. No one admits it. Helen has been here before, metaphorically. Back in Sparta, when the whispers began. Back in Troy, when the ships arrived. Back in her mother's arms, when feathers brushed her skin and her fate slid beneath it like a blade hidden in silk. She knows this rhythm, the stillness before the collapse, the calm before the retelling begins. Because that's what's coming. Not just war, but narrative. Someone will shape this. Someone will explain it. And Helen? She will either be the cause or the casualty. Again, she makes her way to the city wall, alone. She climbs the narrow stairs with the ease of someone who's memorized every stone, every crack, every place where gods once stood in disguise. When she reaches the top, she doesn't look down at the Greek camp. She looks up at the sky, where the stars have begun to arrange themselves into stories, constellations snapping into place like old wounds reopening. You wonder if she sees her name among them. You wonder if she's tired of being mythology. Below, the Trojans are dragging the horse into the city. A gift, they say, an offering, a miracle. And not one of them hears the wood groan under its own secrets. Helen hears it. The creak, the shift, the soft clink of armor inside the belly of deception. She closes her eyes, not to pray, to memorize, to etch this moment into her bones for the day someone asks, "Didn't you know?" And she will answer, "Of course." But knowing is not the same as stopping. Later, she walks past the stables where the guards are already drunk, celebrating their imagined victory. One reaches out to touch her, not with cruelty, but reverence, like a man brushing his fingers across a relic. "You saved us," he slurs. "You ended it." Helen pauses, just long enough to whisper, "I haven't ended anything," and keeps walking. Let's leave her there for a moment and slip across time again. Ancient West Africa, in the kingdom of Dahomey, where women trained as elite warriors, the Agagi. These weren't mythical Amazons. They were real, tactical, fearless. They fought for their land, for their queen, for each other. And they had rituals before battle, songs, dances, stories that reminded them they were more than weapons. They were witnesses, carriers of memory. Helen would have understood that. Not the violence, but the need to carry truth through the fire, even if no one believed her version of it. Back in Troy, the horse stands silent in the courtyard. Children climb on it. Priests bless it. Politicians praise it. And at the center of it all, Helen moves like a shadow that's learned how to walk in daylight. She stops near the base of the structure and places her hand on the wood. Just for a second. Just long enough. Then she turns and says, almost to herself, "They carved their death with the same hands they used to write my story." And then comes the whisper. "Paris is dead." You feel it like a gust of wind through an open door. Not grief, not shock, just inevitability. He was wounded in battle, struck by a poisoned arrow. He tried to find a healer, failed, died alone, they say. Or maybe not. Maybe the gods were kind and sent him dreams of Helen before the end. Maybe they weren't. Either way, she receives the news with a stillness that is neither cold nor kind. She simply says, "He loved the idea of me," then walks to her chamber and closes the door. She doesn't weep, but that night, she lights a fire in her hearth and burns the necklace he gave her, the one shaped like a flame. It melts fast, a gold tear collapsing into itself. She watches it vanish, then sits in the dark for hours, not moving, not speaking, just breathing in the ashes of her myth. Let's not skip the required detour. Back to ancient Japan, Heian period. Lovers there sent each other poems, not for seduction, but for proof. Proof of longing, of presence, of shared silence. One emperor's mistress once wrote, "The moon sees more of my body than my husband does." And another wrote, "If I vanish, follow the trail of falling petals. I will be where they land." Love was a ghost in their world, beautiful, poetic, doomed to float between rooms. Helen is that ghost now. Only no one writes her poems anymore. Only rumors. In the Greek camp, Menelaus prepares. Not for war, but for reclamation. He wants Helen back. Not because he loves her, but because owning her again would mean winning. Would mean restoring the image of himself he lost when she left. You watch him polish his armor, not for battle, but for presentation. He plans to arrive not as a soldier, but as a husband. As if years of bloodshed can be erased by the return of something that was never his to begin with. Back in Troy, Helen receives a visitor. An old servant, one of the few left from her early days. He says nothing, just brings her a bowl of water, a comb, a dress the color of dusk. "They'll ask you to go with him," he says. "Will you?" She doesn't answer. Instead, she takes the comb, drags it through her hair, and whispers, "If I go, it will not be because he won." She pauses. "It will be because I'm done letting others end the story for me." And that's the truth of her now. Not Helen the wife, not Helen the prize, not even Helen the destroyer. Just Helen, standing on the cusp of her own ending, her name carved into every wall, her silence heavier than any song. You watch her sit by the window that night, watching the stars realign, the constellations shifting as if the universe itself is trying to revise her myth. And in the quiet, she finally smiles. Not wide, just enough. Because maybe, just maybe, she's the one rewriting it now. It begins with smoke. Not from fire, not yet, but from incense, thick and sweet, curling up from braziers lit at the gates of the palace, as priests and priestesses perform rites that taste more of desperation than devotion. You smell it before you see it. That blend of burning myrrh and old ash, of gods being begged one final time to take sides, or at least stop playing dice with mortals. And in the center of it all, Helen, draped in mourning colors, the same gown she stitched herself weeks ago, the one that doesn't shimmer or cling or flatter, just hangs from her body like memory. She stands still, eyes locked on the horizon, watching as the city braces for the end it always knew was coming. The horse looms behind her now, massive, silent, patient, as if it too is waiting for the curtain to drop. But the tragedy isn't in the waiting. It's in the knowing, because Helen knows what's inside it. You know she does. Maybe not in detail, not in schematics or numbers, but she feels the trap in her bones. The weight of deception shaped to look like tribute. She sees the Greek craftsmanship in every carved plank, the precision, the confidence, the hunger. And she sees something else too. The shape of her own reflection in its flank, warped and elongated, as if the gods are mocking her one final time. She doesn't say a word. She just turns and walks back inside, barefoot, each step echoing like a countdown. Inside the palace, the mood is thick with prophecy. Everyone's pretending it's a normal day, servants laying out trays, scribes copying decrees, guards sharpening spears that won't be used, but their eyes betray them. No one believes in survival anymore, only in choreography, going through the motion so that when the moment comes, they can say they did their part. Even Paris's death has become just another beat in the rhythm of collapse. No mourning, no rites. Just an empty seat at council meetings and a dagger hung quietly in the Hall of Heroes. Helen drifts through it all like smoke. She stops in the library, runs her fingers along the spines of scrolls she once read for comfort. She visits the nursery where children once played, and now only silence lingers. She kneels in the garden and places her palm in the dirt, whispering something in a language no one uses anymore. When she finally returns to her room, she finds the servant boy waiting. The one who always looks like he's half afraid of her, half in awe. He hands her a note, no seal. Just 3 words. Tomorrow it breaks. She doesn't ask who sent it. She doesn't need to. She burns it over a candle and lets the ash fall into her tea. Now a detour not for distraction, but for context. In the court of Mughal India, there was a tradition called Mehfil, a gathering of poets, musicians, and philosophers where love was debated like law. One emperor once asked, "Is a woman still a seductress if she never speaks, never moves, never even looks your way, but still consumes your every thought?" A poet answered, "Yes, because her silence teaches you what desire can never satisfy." Helen is that silence now, not passive, not empty, just full of meaning no one knows how to translate. That night, Menelaus prepares his armor. Not out of necessity, he won't be the one breaching the walls, but out of vanity. He imagines the moment, the reclaiming, the return. He sees her stepping forward, repentant, radiant, ready to come home. What he doesn't imagine is the Helen who no longer bends. The Helen who doesn't belong to him. The Helen who, tomorrow, may look at him and see not a husband, but a narrator she never consented to. And as for the Greeks hiding inside the horse, you can almost hear their breath, can almost feel their tension. They wait in the dark, crammed together, blades close, hearts tighter. Odysseus, always patient. Diomedes, coiled. Men who have fought monsters now trembling in wood. They believe in their plan. They believe in the gods. But none of them stop to ask what happens after they win. After the city burns. After Helen steps into the ruins and refuses to play the part they wrote for her. Just before dawn, the Trojans celebrate. Their false victory, their relief, wine flows. Dancers move like they don't feel the floor. Helen sits alone at the edge of the feast, untouched. A ghost in plain sight. One drunk noble approaches her, slurring, "Dance for us, queen." She looks at him one slow blink and says, "I already did, years ago." "You're still bleeding." From it, he stumbles back, embarrassed, and the laughter doesn't come. Let's wander once more. Ancient Mesopotamia. The goddess Inanna descends into the underworld, shedding layers of her power at each gate. Jewelry, clothing, weapons. She arrives naked, powerless. And yet, it is in that vulnerability that she conquers death. She returns. With knowledge, with fury. Helen is walking that same descent now. Every step a shedding, every gaze a gate. And when she reaches the bottom, when Troy finally cracks open like a rib cage, what will she return with? Just before sunrise, she walks to the courtyard. No one is there. Not yet. The sky is bleeding orange and gray. She places her hand on the horse again. "Will they remember you?" she whispers. "Or just the fire that came after?" Then she turns and walks back inside, not to sleep, but to wait, to bear witness, to outlive. Because that's what Helen does now. She survives the story. Even when it breaks around her, it begins in stillness, deceptive, thick, the kind of silence you only hear right before thunder or betrayal. Troy wakes slowly that morning, not to alarm bells, not to the clash of arms, but to birdsong. Perfect, delicate birdsong. As if the world is trying to distract itself. As if beauty might delay what's coming. Helen hears it first. She's already awake, already dressed, already standing by the window like she's been waiting for the sun to show up and confirm what she already knows. This is the day the story folds inward. This is the chapter written in fire. Below her, the streets are unnaturally calm. Soldiers sleep with helmets beside them. Children run with bread crusts in hand. Somewhere in the distance, the temple bells chime. But Helen doesn't hear celebration in them. She hears countdowns. She moves through the palace like a dream she doesn't want to wake from. Her feet glide across marble that still smells faintly of last night's wine. Every corridor holds ghosts now. Hector's voice in the council hall. Priam's shadow by the throne. Paris's touch clinging to the doors he once stormed through. She doesn't pause. She doesn't blink. She descends the stairs and walks into the open square, where the wooden horse stands like an idol. Some are still kneeling beside it, lighting incense, draping garlands over its hooves. Others begin to trickle away, returning to their homes, their duties, their illusions. Helen stands beside it once more, touches the wood one final time. "It isn't you I hate," she says. "It's the story you're hiding." And then it begins, the breaking. You don't hear it at first. Not with your ears, you feel it. Like a breath drawn too sharply. Then, faintly, the groan of wood stretching. The soft shuffle of boots inside a belly meant for secrets. And then the scream, sharp, brutal, unmistakable. The gates swing wide not from command, but from collapse. The guards are dead before they can shout. The city's heart is pierced before it even remembers how to beat in fear. The Greeks pour out of the horse like judgment uncoiled, silent at first, then screaming. Blades flashing, torches raised. Odysseus leads them, mouth set, eyes cold. Menelaus isn't far behind. The others follow like a tide that's finally reached the shore it was promised. They kill indiscriminately. Priests, children, nobles, anyone who stands in the way of their victory. And Troy, glorious, arrogant Troy, falls in a single exhale. Helen does not run. She doesn't scream. She walks through the chaos like the eye of a storm, untouched. Soldiers part for her without realizing why. Fire licks the walls but never touches her dress. She moves through her palace, her city, her myth, collecting pieces. One girl sobbing under a table. A servant boy with a broken arm. A priest clutching scrolls instead of swords. She moves them, hides them, shields them, never speaking. Just moving, and then she reaches the throne room. And there he is, Menelaus, blood on his sword. Ash in his hair, standing where Priam once ruled. He sees her and freezes. Not because she's beautiful, though she still is, even now, but because she's real. He hadn't imagined that. He imagined statues, paintings, a memory. Not this. Woman who walks toward him with eyes too tired to plead. He speaks first. You came back. She doesn't answer. He steps forward. I thought they lied. I thought they'd changed you. She looks at him now, really looks. No, she says, you just never saw me clearly. He reaches for her. She steps back. I'll return, she says. But not because you won, because I've survived worse. Let's pivot briefly, as always. In 18th century France, during the reign of Louis XVI, a group of women began publishing anonymous essays under male pseudonyms critiquing the monarchy, religion, and the myth of female obedience. One pamphlet read, "We have been history's punctuation. Decorative, structural, silent, but no longer." Helen is that pamphlet now, unfolded, read aloud, and left behind in a palace that's burning. Back inside the palace, Menelaus stands, in awe of her poise. But poise is just survival's costume. He doesn't see the years of erosion that built it. Doesn't hear the screams she swallowed for diplomacy. He just sees his prize returned. But Helen? She's already beyond him. As they prepare to leave Troy, what's left of it, she walks through the ash of her life and collects nothing. No keepsakes. No relics, just memories. And even though she leaves behind in pieces dotted the docks, as the ships load, she stands alone. The Greeks cheer. They believe they've won. But Helen knows better, because myths don't end. They echo. They change clothes. They survive the fire. And she's a myth now, not because of what she did, but because of what they needed her to be. One final detour. In parts of indigenous Australian storytelling, a songline is a path across the land that marks the journey of ancestral spirits. To walk a songline is to follow the memory of creation. Every tree, every rock, every turn has meaning. Helen has walked her own songline from the river where Zeus fell as a swan, to the palace of Sparta, to the blood-soaked steps of Troy. Her footsteps now sing with stories no poet will ever get quite right. And as the ship leaves the shore, she looks back once, just once, not at the fire, not at the ruins, but at the sea itself, because the sea remembers. The sea carries everything, and somewhere in its depths is a feather, still white, still waiting. It starts with silence, an unnatural, aching kind of silence that only comes after everything else has screamed itself hoarse. The sea is too calm, the sky too blue. The sails flap lazily, disinterested in glory. You stand aboard the Greek ship, now watching the coastline shrink. Troy, once luminous, now just smudges of smoke and ruin on the horizon. And beside you she stands, Helen, no chains, No tears, just her spine held straight like a spear she no longer needs to wield. Menelaus stands several paces behind, speaking with Odysseus in low tones, but his eyes keep flicking back to her like he's unsure whether she's real or a dream he has to contain. He won't touch her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Something in her quiet has reshaped the space around her. She's not the Helen he marched to war for. She's something sharper now, something ancient, something untouchable. The crew avoids her. They bow slightly when passing, pretend not to stare. They've heard the stories. Some believe she's the reason Troy burned. Others think she's a goddess in disguise, a punishment for the pride of kings. One man swears he saw her whisper to the waves last night, and now the tide is following the ship too closely. No one laughs. Not anymore. At night, she walks the deck barefoot, her hair braided back with strands of black ribbon, mourning, not for Paris, not for Troy, but for something deeper. The girl she used to be. The one who believed she could choose. She stares up at the stars, and for a moment, you wonder if she's searching for herself among the constellations. But no, she's not looking up. She's listening. And the sky is answering. Let's detour, as we do, to a Roman myth carved into an old wine vessel. A woman named Proserpina stolen into the underworld, claimed by Pluto, made queen by force. But when she returns to Earth each spring, her footsteps are said to bloom flowers, not because she forgives, but because even after all the fire, she remembers how to grow. Helen is Proserpina now, no longer someone's wife, no longer someone's reason, just someone who endured the underworld and decided it didn't deserve her. On the third day at sea, Menelaus finally speaks to her, just once. He says, "We'll rebuild," not as a question, not as an apology, just a plan. Helen doesn't respond, but her eyes flick toward the coastline, still visible in the far distance, still burning. "Some things aren't meant to be rebuilt," she finally says. "Some things are meant to be buried." And with that, she walks away. They dock in Sparta. Weeks later, the city throws garlands. Women line the roads. Priests chant prayers about restoration, harmony, victory. And at the center of it all, Helen, silent, statuesque, stepping onto the soil she left what feels like a lifetime ago. She walks beside Menelaus, but they don't touch. She's greeted like a queen, but she doesn't bow. The people don't know what to say. They cheer, but it's hollow. Even they can feel it. This isn't triumph. This is aftermath. In the palace, everything is as she left it. Almost insultingly so. Her chambers are still arranged the same, her gowns untouched. A bowl of dried olives, long since rotted, still sits on the sill where she placed it years ago. The city preserved her absence like a shrine. But Helen? She's no relic. She's the ghost who returned before she was finished haunting. She spends her days walking the periphery, through gardens overgrown with ivy, into temples where her name is still whispered with half fear, half praise. And at night, she sits alone, unraveling old tapestries. Not because she needs the thread, but because she's tired of seeing stories told in other people's colors. One day, she visits the marketplace in disguised simple robe, veil drawn. She walks among her people, listens. Some speak kindly, others not. "She doomed us," one woman says. "They fought for her, and we starved for it." Another replies, "She didn't ask to be made into a prize." And still another, "Maybe she did." Who wouldn't, with that face? Helen keeps walking, never correcting. She's learned that explanations don't survive translation. Only symbols do. And she's tired of being one. Here's your French historical note. In early medieval Ireland, poets known as Fili were so revered. Their verses were believed to carry legal weight. An insult written in verse could ruin a king. A praise song could protect entire villages. Their power came not from swords, but from how they shaped memory. Helen would have been a terrifying Feely. Not because she wrote poetry, but because her existence forced others to write it badly, desperately, inaccurately. She became myth by default. And no myth can defend itself. Eventually, the bards come, one by one. They want to record her tale. They want her version. Some are respectful, others hungry. One young man offers her a scroll and says, "I only want your truth." Helen looks at him for a long time. "My truth," she says, "is not the version you can write. It's the one you will spend the rest of your life trying not to get wrong." He doesn't understand, but he writes anyway. The years pass. The world moves on. Cities rise. Wars are retold with different names. But Helen becomes an idea, a caution, a desire, a metaphor. Men debate whether she was worth the war. Women debate whether she chose. Historians argue over sources that never asked her anything at all. But here's what no one sees. Late at night, in the garden where no one follows, Helen lights one single candle. She places it beside a feather, white, smooth, untouched by fire. The same one she kept all these years, hidden in a box behind layers of silk. She places her hand beside it, closes her eyes, and says quietly, "You started it, but I finished it." And that's the secret, the real story. Not that she was taken, not that she ran, not even that she survived, but that she ended it. On her own terms. That it begins not with thunder, not with prophecy, but with rain. Soft, steady, cleansing. The kind that doesn't rush but subtle seeps into stone, into soil, into the bones of a city that has forgotten how to feel clean. You stand in the gardens of Sparta, where the vines have reclaimed old statues, and the wind carries the scent of rosemary, and something older perhaps memory. Helen sits beneath the oldest olive tree, her cloak pulled close around her shoulders, her eyes half closed as droplets trace the lines of her face. She doesn't move, doesn't speak. It's the first time in years she hasn't been watched, judged, interpreted. No soldiers, no poets, no gods. Just rain, and for the first time in forever, she lets it touch her. Around her, Sparta hums like a forgotten song. Children chase each other between columns that once held speeches. Merchants sell figs that drip with sweetness. No one looks toward the palace. No one mentions her name unless prompted. She has become, at last, a fixture. A pillar in the corner of the room no one dares move, but everyone learns to ignore. And she doesn't mind. There is peace in the forgetting, power in the unwatching. Her myth has cooled. The heat of blame has passed, but something inside her still flickers. Not anger, not grief, something else. The quiet ache of a story that never closed. The old bard said that the gods envy us because we die. But Helen, half immortal in fame, if not in flesh, has discovered the heavier curse, to be remembered in every way except truthfully. She stands now and walks barefoot across the wet stones, her reflection following in puddles like a past life. Trailing just behind, she doesn't hurry. Her story moves differently now. Inside the palace, scrolls have begun to pile up. Versions of her tale, drafts, retellings, conflicting accounts. In one, she's a victim. In another, a villain. In still another, she never left Sparta at all, and it was a phantom that burned Troy. Helen reads them all. Not out of vanity, but out of fascination. She underlines the lies, circles the phrases that almost got it right. Occasionally, she writes a word in the margin. Not corrections, just echoes. A counterspell in ink. One day, a scholar visits from Athens, young, nervous. He bows deeply and asks her if he may ask questions for his thesis. She raises an eyebrow. A thesis on what? He stammers, on the anatomy of myth. Specifically, your myth. She waves him inside. Offers tea. Listens as he quotes verses, cites philosophers, stumbles over euphemisms. Finally he asks, Do you think it was fate? And Helen, smiling for the first time that day, leans forward. I think fate is the name men give the mess they make when they don't want to admit it was all choice. He doesn't write that down, but he remembers it forever. And now, for your final historical aside, in 14th century Iran, under the Ilkhanid dynasty, women poets began composing verse under male pseudonyms. Some were court poets, others rebels. One wrote, I wear your name like a veil, but the voice beneath it is mine. That's Helen, a voice beneath 1,000 veils. A story that kept getting rewritten by men who couldn't bear that she'd lived it. At night, she still dreams of feathers. Not swans, never again, but of flight, of drifting, of being unchaste. In one dream, she floats above Troy, not in fear, not in regret, but simply watching. And below, the city rebuilds. Not perfectly, not proudly, but truthfully, without gods, without war, without needing a woman's face to justify its fire. She wakes from this dream with tears on her cheek, and smiles anyway. One morning she walks beyond the city walls, alone. No guards, no fanfare, just her and the road. She doesn't tell anyone where she's going, and no one follows. It takes a day before anyone notices, another before they start to ask. But by then, she's already a constellation. Not literally, but figuratively. A figure spoken of in low voices, with reverence, with discomfort, with awe. She just walked away, they say. She left the palace, left the myth. Some claim she went to Egypt, others that she joined a temple disguised as a widow. A few whisper she returned to the riverbank where it all began, to the place where a swan once landed and the world changed its shape. But you know better. She didn't go anywhere. She just chose, finally, to exist beyond the narrative. No longer the object, no longer the origin. Just a woman who outlived her own legend. And now here you are, still listening, still wondering, still trying to make sense of what it all meant. But maybe it's not meant to be made sense of. Maybe it's meant to haunt, to whisper, to flicker in your memory the next time someone tells you a story that begins with a woman and ends with a war.